People always say that you never see it coming, and for the longest time I believed that. I thought I had everything figured out: a strong marriage, a stable job, a life that was predictable and in its own way fulfilling. We didn't have kids, but that was something we'd accepted, or at least I thought we had. We'd been married for nearly a decade, and like most long-term couples, we'd settled into a routine. I'd get up early, hit the gym, and then head off to work. She'd do her thing. She always had her own projects, her own life outside of us. We'd meet up in the evenings, cook dinner together, maybe watch a movie or a show, and then head to bed. It wasn't exciting, but it was comfortable. And I thought that was enough. But somewhere along the way, things started to change. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing ever is when it's real life. It showed in the subtle changes. The way she'd come home later than usual, or how she'd be distracted even when we were together. I'd ask her how her day was, and she'd give me short answers, her mind clearly elsewhere. I figured it was just the stress of work, or maybe she was going through something she didn't want to talk about. I didn't push it. I trusted her. We were partners, and partners don't need to know every single thing. But then, she started pulling away more. There were more late nights at work, more nights out with friends I didn't know. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her side of the bed empty, the sheets cold. When she'd finally come home, she'd make some excuse, kiss me on the cheek, and slip into bed, thinking I was still asleep. I wanted to confront her, to ask her what was going on, but I didn't. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was being paranoid. But the doubt troubled me, gradually undermining the trust we had built over the years. Then one morning, she dropped the bomb. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she stood in the kitchen, looking at me with those wide, uncertain eyes. I remember the way she was holding her coffee cup, both hands wrapped around it, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I stared at her, my mind going blank. Pregnant? How could she be pregnant? We'd always known that kids weren't in the cards for us. I'd known for years that I was sterile. A fact I had kept to myself to avoid making her feel trapped. We'd talked about it once early on in our marriage and agreed that we'd be okay without kids. It was something we'd accepted and I thought we'd moved on from. But now she was standing there telling me she was pregnant, and it felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. At first, I smiled, an automatic reaction that didn't reach my eyes. I stood up, walked over to her, and hugged her, trying to process what she just said. That's great news, I managed to say, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. She smiled back, but there was something off in her eyes, something that made my stomach twist. I pulled back, searching her face, trying to find the words to ask what I needed to know. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't destroy the moment, couldn't shatter the fragile hope in her eyes. So I waited. I waited until later that night, when the house was quiet and we were lying in bed. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice barely audible in the darkness. She turned to me, her face lit only by the faint glow of the bedside lamp. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words I was about to say. "I've known for a long time that I can't have kids. I'm sterile. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you." I thought we were okay with it. I thought you were okay with it. The silence that followed was suffocating. She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock, then with something else, something I couldn't quite place. She shook her head, her voice trembling as she spoke. "No, that can't be. I'm pregnant, Mike. I'm pregnant." And that's when it hit her. I saw it in her eyes, the realization, the horror, the guilt. She pulled away from me, her hands shaking as she covered her mouth like she could somehow take back what she'd said. I felt like the world had just collapsed around me. The woman I'd trusted more than anyone, the woman I'd built my life with, had betrayed me in a way I never could have imagined. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to know who it was, how long it had been going on, why she did this to us. But I couldn't find the words. All I could do was lie there, staring at the ceiling as the reality of our situation set in. The baby wasn't mine, it never could be. And now, everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my life, was gone. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions, waking up, going to work, coming home, but it was like I was on autopilot. My mind kept replaying that night, her words echoing in my head. The baby isn't mine. The baby isn't mine. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck in my throat. I wasn't ready to hear what she had to say. I wasn't ready to face the reality that my marriage, the life we'd built together, was crumbling around me. She tried to pretend everything was normal. She'd talk about the baby like it was the most natural thing in the world, like nothing had changed between us. But I could see the fear in her eyes, the way she avoided looking at me for too long, the way she'd flinch every time I got too close. She knew I knew, and yet we both kept up the charade. One night, about a week after she'd told me she was pregnant, I couldn't take it anymore. I'd come home late from work, having spent hours sitting in my car, driving aimlessly around the city, trying to make sense of everything. When I walked through the door, she was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, though I could tell she wasn't really watching it. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that we were okay. So I sat down across from her, leaned forward, and finally asked the question that had been burning in my mind since that night. Who is he? She flinched, her eyes dropping to the floor. She didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I thought she might lie to me again. But then she looked up, tears brimming in her eyes, and whispered, "His name is David." The name felt like a knife in my gut, sharp. I didn't know who he was, didn't care to know. All I knew was that he wasn't me, and that was enough to make my blood boil. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady, though I felt anything but. She wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. "A few months. It started at work. We didn't mean for it to happen, but..." Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I nodded, feeling a numbness settle over me. A few months. That was how long it had taken for her to throw away everything we had. How long it had taken for her to let someone else into our life, our marriage. I felt sick, like I was going to throw up, but I held it together. I had to know. "And the baby?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She hesitated, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "I don't know for sure, but it's probably his. Probably." That word hung in the air between us, a cruel reminder of how little I mattered in this equation. It was like I'd been erased from my own life, replaced by this stranger who'd taken everything from me. I stood up, needing to put some distance between us. I walked to the window, staring out into the dark, empty street. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do, how to move forward from this. But all I could think about was how everything had changed, how nothing would ever be the same again. "I'm sorry," she said from behind me, her voice barely a whisper. "I never meant to hurt you, Mike. I swear. I didn't. It just happened." I turned to face her, feeling a wave of anger rise up in me. "It just happened?" I repeated, my voice shaking with the effort to stay calm. "You cheated on me, got pregnant, and lied to my face, and you're telling me it just happened?" She flinched again, her tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry," she said again, like those words could somehow undo the damage she'd done, but they couldn't. Nothing could. "I need time," I said, my voice hollow. "I need to figure out what I'm going to do." She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand. But did she? Did she really understand what she'd done? Did she understand how she destroyed the life we'd built together, the trust we'd shared? I didn't think she did. How could she? That night, I slept in the guest room. I couldn't bear to be near her, to feel her presence beside me, knowing what she'd done. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything, but there were no answers, no solutions. Just the cold, hard truth that the woman I loved had betrayed me, and there was no going back. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I told her I needed space, time to think, but the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever come back. How do you rebuild a life that's been shattered? How do you forgive someone who's broken your heart in the worst possible way? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I couldn't stay, not after what I'd learned. So I left, driving away from the life I thought I knew, and into a future that suddenly felt uncertain and terrifyingly empty. Leaving the house that morning was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I wasn't just walking out on her, I was walking out on the life we'd built together. But what was left to salvage? The marriage I thought I had was a lie. and the future I imagined was gone, replaced by a bleak unknown. I found a small motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where people go to disappear. The room was basic: a bed, a dresser, a TV that buzzed with static, and a bathroom with tiles that had seen better days. It was a far cry from the home we'd shared, but in a way, that was what I needed. Something different. Something that didn't remind me of her, of us. I spent the next few days in that room, barely leaving except to grab a coffee or something to eat. I couldn't bring myself to talk to anyone. I was too lost in my thoughts, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. I kept replaying our conversations, the moments leading up to her confession, wondering if there had been something I could have done differently. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see a way out of the mess we were in. She called me a few times, but I didn't answer. Every time my phone buzzed with her name on the screen, it felt like a punch to the gut. I knew I couldn't avoid her forever, but I wasn't ready to deal with her apologies, her tears, her attempts to explain away what she'd done. On the third night, I finally answered. It was late, and I was lying on the stiff motel bed, staring at the ceiling when the phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me knew I couldn't keep running. I needed to hear her voice to know what she had to say. Mike, her voice was soft, hesitant, like she wasn't sure I'd actually pick up. "Are you there?" "Yeah," I said, my voice rough from days of silence. "I'm here." There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end, like she was trying to figure out what to say next. Finally, she spoke. "I'm so sorry. I don't even know where to start. I've been a wreck since you left. I know I messed up, but I don't know how to fix this." I closed my eyes, the familiar wave of anger and hurt washing over me. "I don't know if you can fix this," I said, the words heavy in my mouth. "You lied to me over and over again. You had an affair, and now there's a baby involved. How do you expect me to just move past that?" "I don't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't expect anything. I just want you to know how sorry I am. I never wanted to hurt you, Mike. I never meant for any of this to happen." There it was again. I never meant for this to happen. Like it was all some kind of accident, like she'd just tripped and fallen into someone else's arms. But it wasn't an accident. It was a choice she made, over and over again until there was no turning back. "You made your choices," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You knew what you were doing, and you did it anyway. And now we're here." "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed everything up. But I love you, Mike. I love you so much. Please, can we try to work this out? Can we try to find a way back?" I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love could somehow erase the betrayal, like that we could go back to the way things were. But I knew it wasn't that simple. Love wasn't enough to fix the broken trust, to heal the wounds she'd inflicted on our marriage. "I don't know," I said, the truth of it settling heavily in my chest. "I don't know if I can do that." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost hear her heart breaking. "Please, Mike," she said finally, her voice thick with tears. "Please don't give up on us. I'll do anything. I'll leave my job. I'll cut ties with him, whatever it takes. Just please don't walk away." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her back and try to rebuild what we'd lost. But another part of me, the part that had been crushed by her betrayal, couldn't see how we could ever go back to what we were. "I need time," I said, the only words I could find. "I need time to figure out if I can forgive you, if we can move forward." She didn't argue. She just whispered, "Okay, I understand. Just please don't shut me out completely. Please don't disappear." "I won't," I promised, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. "But I can't be with you right now. I need space." "I'll give you space," she said, her voice cracking. "But please, Mike, don't give up on us." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, the phone still clutched in my hand. I knew she was scared, and in a way, so was I. But I couldn't just sweep everything under the rug. I needed to figure out what I wanted, what I could live with. The next few days were even harder. I didn't know where to turn, who to talk to. I didn't want to unload this mess onto friends or family. They'd only see her as the villain, and I wasn't ready to make that decision yet. So, I stayed in the motel, my thoughts a constant loop of anger, hurt, and confusion. Eventually, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't stay in that room forever, hiding from the world. I started going out, taking long walks through the city, trying to clear my head. I even drove by our house a couple of times, parking down the street, watching the lights in the windows, wondering what she was doing, what she was thinking. But I couldn't bring myself to go inside. The pain was still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. I wasn't ready to face her, to face what we'd become. So I kept walking, kept driving, kept trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. And with every step, every mile, I realized that the life I thought I had was slipping further and further away, replaced by a future I couldn't even begin to imagine. I was still walking that fine line between numbness and rage when things took a turn for the worse. I'd been staying at the motel for nearly 2 weeks, stuck in a cycle of indecision, trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage my marriage. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was just delaying the inevitable. One evening, after another long, aimless drive around the city, I found myself parked outside a bar. I wasn't much of a drinker, but I needed something, anything, to dull the constant ache in my chest. I went inside, ordered a whiskey, and sat at the bar, nursing my drink and staring at the condensation forming on the glass. That's when I noticed him. He was sitting at the far end of the bar, his back to me, but there was something familiar about him. It took me a moment to place it, but then it hit me. This was David, the man who had shattered my life without even knowing it, the man who had taken what was mine. The anger that had been simmering inside me since the moment she'd told me about the pregnancy flared up, hot and consuming. I clenched my fists, my mind racing with the urge to do something, anything, to make him pay for what he'd done. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think. I needed to be smart about this. I watched him for a while, trying to figure out what I should do. He was alone, sipping a beer, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to collide with mine. I could feel the tension building inside me, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Every muscle in my body was tense, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, walked over to where he was sitting, and slid onto the stool next to him. He glanced over at me, probably thinking I was just another guy looking to drown his sorrows, but when our eyes met, something shifted in his expression. He knew. He knew who I was, and I could see the realization dawn on his face, the recognition in his eyes. "David, right?" I said, my voice deceptively calm. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat, and nodded. "Yeah. And Mike? Mike, right?" I nodded, my eyes locked on his. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The tension between us crackled like a live wire, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, I broke the silence. "So you're the one who's been sleeping with my wife." He flinched, and I saw his hand tighten around his beer bottle. "Look, Mike, I didn't know she was married at first, and when I found out, I tried to end it. But things got complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think getting my wife pregnant is just complicated?" He winced, but he didn't back down. "I'm sorry, I really am. But it wasn't just some fling. We care about each other." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected him to grovel, to apologize, to admit he was wrong, but instead he was standing his ground, trying to justify what he'd done. "Care about each other?" I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You care about each other so much that you're willing to destroy my marriage? My life?" He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, I slammed my fist down on the bar, the sound echoing through the room. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined everything. Everything." He flinched again, and I could see the fear in his eyes now, the realization that this wasn't going to end well. But instead of backing down, he squared his shoulders, meeting my gaze with a stubborn defiance. "Look, Mike, I didn't come here to fight. I'm not proud of what happened, but it did happen, and now we have to deal with it." "Deal with it?" I spat, barely able to contain my rage. "You think this is something we can just deal with? You think I'm just going to let you walk away after what you've done?" He set his beer down on the bar, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry?" "Fine, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to apologize for loving her. That's not something I can control." The word love snapped something inside me. All the anger, the pain, the betrayal I'd been holding back came roaring to the surface. And before I knew it, I'd grabbed him by the collar, pulling him out of his seat and shoving him against the wall. "You don't get to say that," I snarled, my face inches from his. "You don't get to talk about love when you've destroyed mine." He tried to push me off, but I was stronger, fueled by a rage that I didn't know I was capable of. I pinned him against the wall, my fist clenched, ready to swing. "Mike, stop!" a voice shouted from behind me. I froze, my fist still raised, and turned to see her standing in the doorway. All I could see was the look of horror on her face as she took in the scene in front of her. "Let him go," she said, her voice trembling. I hesitated, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins, but then I saw the tears in her eyes, the desperation in her voice, and I let go of his collar, stepping back. He slumped against the wall, breathing heavily, but he didn't say anything. He just looked at her, then at me, like he was trying to figure out how this was going to end. She stepped between us, her hands outstretched as if to keep us apart. "Mike, please. This isn't the way. We need to talk, all of us. We need to figure out what we're going to do." I looked at her, my chest heaving with the effort to hold myself back. "Figure it out? What is there to figure out? You slept with him, you lied to me, and now you're pregnant with his kid. What's left to say?" She winced, but she didn't back down. "I know I hurt you. I know I've messed everything up, but we can't solve this with violence. Please, Mike, let's just talk." I looked at her, then at him, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. I'd thought confronting him would make me feel better, would give me some sense of closure. But now, standing there with my fist still clenched, all I felt was emptiness. "Fine," I said finally, my voice flat. "We'll talk." She started talking first, her voice shaky as she tried to explain everything. "What do you want from me?" I asked, cutting her off mid-sentence. "What's the point of all this? Do you want my blessing? Do you want me to step aside so you two can play house with your kid?" "No," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with shock. "I don't want that. I want to find a way to make this right." "There is no making this right," I said, my voice cold. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." David finally spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Mike, I know this is hard, and I don't expect you to forgive us, but we're all connected now, whether we like it or not. We need to figure out how we're going to move forward, for all our sakes." I wanted to punch him, to wipe that calm, rational look off his face, but I knew he was right. As much as I hated it, we were all tangled up in this mess together, and there was no easy way out. "So what's your plan?" I asked, leaning back in my seat, arms crossed. "You two play happy family, and I just fade into the background?" She shook her head, her eyes pleading. "No, Mike, I want to try and make things work between us. I know it's going to be hard, but I love you. I still love you." "Love?" I laughed bitterly. "You're sitting here with the guy who ruined our marriage, and you're talking about love? You don't even know what love is." Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she was going to break down. But she didn't. She held it together, wiping away the tears that had started to fall, and took a deep breath. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice steady, "and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I can't just walk away from what we had. I can't just give up on us." I looked at her, searching her face for any sign that she really meant it, that she wasn't just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. But all I saw was desperation, a deep, aching need to hold on to something that had already slipped through her fingers. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you slept with him," I said, my voice sharp. She flinched, but she didn't argue. Instead, she looked down at the table, her hands twisting in her lap. David reached out, placing his hand over hers, and that was it. I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm done," I said, standing up abruptly. "I can't do this." "Mike, wait," she started, but I cut her off. "No," I said, my voice final. "I've listened. I've tried to understand, but I can't. I can't forgive you for this, and I sure as hell can't be a part of whatever the hell you two have planned." I turned and walked out of the cafe, not caring if they followed or not. As soon as I hit the street, I started walking, needing to get as far away from them as possible. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and betrayal. But beneath it all was a crushing sense of loss. I'd lost her, and I knew there was no getting her back. Not the way she was before, not the way we were before. But maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was time to let go and figure out how to rebuild my life from the ashes. As I walked into the night, the city lights blurring around me, I felt a strange sense of calm, settle over me. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was something close. I knew the road ahead would be rough, but at least now I was on it, moving forward, away from the wreckage, and maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to heal.